A brilliant inventor creates a machine that runs on water or plants or thin air. It promises to solve the global energy crisis overnight. But before it can reach the public, the inventor turns up dead and the blueprints go up in smoke. It is one of the internet's favorite urban legends, the lone genius silenced by shadowy corporate syndicates. And while it makes for an incredible story, the endless repetition of this narrative online has completely blurred the line between historical tragedy and outright pseudoscience. To understand why the world is still deeply tethered to fossil fuels today, we need to open the case files on three of history's most famous alternative energy messiahs: Rudolf Diesel, Henry Ford, and Stanley Meyer. When a revolutionary technology dies, we have to look closely at the body. We need to determine if it was assassinated by a shadowy cabal, or if it simply fell victim to the cold, immovable reality of the system. In 1892, a German engineer named Rudolf Diesel patented a highly efficient compression ignition engine. His original vision was heavily agrarian. He publicly demonstrated a model running on peanut oil, hoping to empower independent farmers to grow their own fuel and bypass the massive coal monopolies of the era. These massive early engines proved that internal combustion could be highly efficient and incredibly powerful. The design was brilliant. But on September 29, 1913, Diesel boarded a ferry crossing the English Channel to London. He retired to his cabin and was never seen alive again. His disappearance immediately sparked rumors that he had been thrown overboard. The suspects seemed obvious. People pointed to oil barons desperate to protect their growing empires, or the German military, determined to keep his engine technology out of British submarines as World War I approached. The forensic truth is much quieter. By 1913, Diesel was physically ailing and completely broke after a series of terrible business decisions. Before leaving for his voyage, he handed his wife a bag. When she opened it a week later, it contained 20,000 marks in cash and bank statements showing their accounts were entirely empty. In his diary left behind on the ship, the date of his disappearance was marked with a simple cross. The evidence points squarely to a tragic suicide. Diesel was not murdered to stop his invention. His engine survived, but his agrarian dream did not. The design was quickly adapted to run on petroleum to fuel the massive war machines of the 20th century. Nearly 30 years later, in 1941, Henry Ford debuted a prototype biocomposite vehicle. Internet lore frequently claims this was a car made entirely of hemp that ran on hemp fuel, and that it was deliberately buried by the DuPont family and powerful oil interests. The centerpiece of this myth is a famous piece of footage showing Ford swinging an axe at a car to prove its strength. But that footage doesn't show the prototype. It actually shows Ford's personal car, fitted with one single experimental rear deck lid. The stunt itself was deceptive. The axe was fitted with a rubber boot to help it bounce. More importantly, the plastic panel wasn't pure hemp. It was held together by phenolic resin, a chemical compound extracted directly from coal tar. What actually killed the biocomposite car was timing. The prototype was unveiled just months before the United States entered World War II. The government immediately suspended civilian automobile manufacturing, redirecting the entire industry toward military production. By the time the war ended, the logistics of sourcing hemp had become incredibly difficult. The Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 had already wrapped the crop in severe legal and financial restrictions, making domestic supply chains nearly impossible to maintain. Ford's project wasn't dismantled by a secret corporate cabal. It suffocated under the crushing weight of global wartime logistics and highly restrictive federal tax codes. The pinnacle of alternative energy conspiracies emerged in the 1980s, when an inventor named Stanley Meyer began showing off a custom blue dune buggy. He claimed the vehicle ran on nothing but tap water. Meyer achieved intense martyr status after dying suddenly in a restaurant parking lot in 1998. According to internet rumors, his final words were a frantic scream that he had been poisoned by big oil. To evaluate Meyer's machine, we have to look at this diagram illustrating the first and second laws of thermodynamics. Splitting a stable chemical like water into hydrogen and oxygen requires energy. Physics dictates that it takes more energy to split those molecules apart than you can ever extract by burning the resulting hydrogen in an engine. When you burn that fuel by combining hydrogen and oxygen, the byproduct left behind is water. Water is the literal ash of hydrogen combustion. An engine that runs on ash to create its own fuel is a perpetual motion machine, and those do not exist. The legal system agreed with the laws of physics. In 1996, an Ohio court found Meyer guilty of gross and egregious fraud after investors had his fuel cell examined by expert witnesses. And the medical reality is equally clear. The official coroner's report showed Meyer suffered from high blood pressure and died of a cerebral aneurysm. Toxicology reports found 0 traces of poison in his system. Rudolf Diesel and Henry Ford were brilliant engineers who faced immense systemic and economic roadblocks. Stanley Meyer, by contrast, was a convicted con artist whose tragic death was immediately weaponized to sell a myth. If the facts are sitting right there in court records and physics textbooks, why do so many people continue to share these stories? We cling to these myths because conspiracy theories are surprisingly comforting. Believing that a shadowy group of billionaires suppresses technology implies that someone is actually in control of the global steering wheel. It suggests that a utopian future is just one unsilenced genius away. The reality is much more intimidating. The global energy landscape is driven by massive, heavy momentum. Shifts in technology are dictated by complex economics, the brutal interruptions of world wars, and the unyielding laws of thermodynamics. True progress rarely comes from a magical machine hidden in a garage. It requires brilliant minds doing the grueling, relentless work of pushing against an incredibly heavy system, 1 inch at a time.